My daughter-in-law didn't know I'd spent the last 9 months learning Japanese. When I heard what she said about me to my son's most important clients at that signing dinner, I understood exactly why my late husband had never trusted her. I just wish I'd done something about it sooner. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I'm 66 years old. I live alone in the house. My husband Richard and I bought in Ashford, Connecticut, 38 years ago, the year before our son Michael was born. Richard died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks. 11 weeks to say goodbye to a 41-year marriage, to a man who was still making me laugh 2 days before he couldn't speak anymore. I taught art history at a small liberal arts college for 32 years. I loved it the way you love something that becomes part of your bones. My students called me Professor Hayes long after I'd retired, when they ran into me at the farmer's market or the library. That always made me smile. Richard used to tease me about it. "You could have been a dentist," he'd say. Nobody calls their dentist at midnight to talk about Baroque architecture. He wasn't wrong, but I never regretted it. After Richard died, the house got very quiet. Michael was in Boston, running the architecture firm he'd built from nothing over the past 12 years. Hayes and Associates had become one of the most respected mid-size firms on the East Coast, specializing in sustainable design. I was proud of him in the way that makes your chest ache, that particular pride you feel when your child becomes someone you'd admire even if you hadn't raised them. His wife, Vanessa, was polished in the way expensive things are polished. Smooth surface, no warmth underneath. I had tried for years to find a way in with her. I brought her flowers she didn't put in water. I remembered her coffee order, her birthday, the name of her college roommate. She accepted all of it pleasantly and gave nothing back. Richard had been direct about his feelings from the beginning. "She married the firm, not Michael," he told me once, driving home from their wedding. "Watch how she talks about his work. It's always our contracts, our clients, our reputation. Never Michael's talent, or what Michael designed. She sees him as a vehicle, Eleanor. That's all." I had told him he was being uncharitable. He had nodded and let it go, because that was Richard. He said what he believed. Once, clearly, and then he let you decide for yourself. I thought about that conversation more and more in the years after he died. Vanessa had a way of making me feel like a houseplant that had been left behind when the family moved. She didn't yell. She didn't exclude me dramatically. She simply kept me at a temperature just warm enough that no one could point to anything specific. When I came to visit, she'd smile and say, "How lovely," and then spend the visit in another room on her phone. When I offered to take my granddaughter Sophie to her weekend art class, Vanessa would hesitate just long enough to signal that this was an imposition before agreeing. She never called me Eleanor. She never called me anything, actually. Pronouns only. She told that to Michael about me once, which he mentioned thinking it was a funny observation. It wasn't. Sophie was 9 years old and absolutely obsessed with anime. She'd been watching it since she was 7, first the gentle ones, then increasingly complex stories with real emotional depth. She'd come to my house on weekends sometimes, just the two of us, and we'd sit on the couch under the quilt Richard's mother had made, and she'd explain the plots to me with the total seriousness of someone briefing a colleague. "Grandma, you have to understand the backstory or none of the rest makes sense." She started teaching me Japanese words the way children teach adults things, with generous patience and barely concealed delight at how slowly we learn. Arigato means thank you. Obachan means grandmother. Kawaii means cute, grandma, like when you wear your blue cardigan with the buttons. That's kawaii. I started writing the words down in a notebook. Then I looked up the pronunciation. Then one afternoon in October of last year, I drove past the community center in Millbrook and saw a flyer in the window. Conversational Japanese. 12 weeks. Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Instructor Keiko Yamamoto, visiting language fellow at the university. I sat in my car for a long moment. Richard had always wanted us to go to Japan. We'd had the guidebooks on our shelf for years. "Kyoto in spring," he'd say. "We'll see the cherry blossoms." We never went. There are a lot of things we never did, and I have stopped being resigned about that. I have started being angry about it in a way that makes me move instead of standing still. I went inside and signed up. Keiko was extraordinary. She was 43, small and precise, with an absolute refusal to let you coast. She had grown up in Osaka, come to the United States for graduate school, and never quite left. She taught with the kind of rigor that felt like respect. "You are all adults," she said on the first night. "I will not speak slowly or repeat myself more than twice. You will keep up or you will practice more at home. Either way, you will learn." I kept up, and then I practiced more at home anyway. I downloaded every app I could find. I bought a workbook. I found a conversation exchange partner online, a retired teacher in Kyoto named Mrs. Fujiwara, who wanted to practice her English and who sent me long, formal emails about her garden and her grandchildren and the particular quality of morning light in November. We video called on Sunday afternoons. She corrected my grammar without embarrassment, and I corrected her idioms without embarrassment, and by February I felt something happening in my brain that I can only describe as doors opening. I didn't tell anyone. Not Michael, not Sophie. Sophie knew we watched anime together, and that I'd been picking up phrases, but she thought of it as a charming grandmotherly hobby, not a serious study. I liked having it be mine. After years of feeling like I was slowly disappearing from my own life, there was something powerful about knowing something that no one knew I knew. Then, 8 months into my lessons, Michael called on a Tuesday evening. "Mom, I need to ask a favor." His voice had that particular tension it got when something at work was going very well and very badly at the same time. "Ask." "We're close to finalizing a major contract, the Hiroshi Group out of Tokyo. It would be the biggest project the firm has ever taken on. A mixed-use sustainable development outside Providence. Mr. Hiroshi is flying in with his team next Friday for the formal signing dinner." He paused. He specifically asked whether my parents would be at the dinner. I had to explain about Dad. He expressed his condolences, and then he said he hoped my mother might still attend. Something lifted in my chest. "I'd be glad to come." "Thank you, Mom. It matters, apparently. Family presence at something like this is meaningful in Japanese business culture. It signals stability, character." Vanessa got on the phone next. She must have been sitting right there, waiting for her turn. "Eleanor." She had apparently decided to use my name. "An event. We're going to Sakura House, that upscale Japanese place downtown. Just a few things. Dress conservatively, nothing too bright. And if the conversation gets technical, just smile and let Michael and me handle it. You don't need to worry about filling silences. These are serious business people. They're not there for small talk." "I understand. And maybe don't bring up art history or teaching. It's not really relevant to what we're doing." I held the phone for a moment. "Of course, Vanessa." "Perfect. We'll pick you up at 6:30. I set the phone down and stood in my kitchen for a while. Then I called Mrs. Fujiwara and practiced for an extra hour. The week moved slowly. I chose a charcoal gray dress I'd bought for a faculty dinner years ago, a string of pearls that had been my mother's low heels. I considered everything Vanessa had said and decided that I would be exactly what I chose to be, which was quiet unless there was a reason not to be. Michael hugged me hard when I got in the car. He looked tired in the way people look when they've been working toward something for a very long time. "Thank you for doing this, Mom. It really does matter to them." Vanessa glanced back from the passenger seat. "You look nice." It was the tone of someone checking a box. Sakura House was understated and beautiful in the way that places are beautiful when they're confident they don't need to try. Private dining room, low lighting, impeccable service. The Hiroshi team was already seated when we arrived. Mr. Hiroshi himself stood immediately. He was perhaps 62, silver at his temples, in a dark suit that managed to be both formal and relaxed. He bowed to Michael and then turned to me, and bowed more deeply. "Mrs. Hayes." His English was careful and precise. "It is an honor. I am very sorry for the loss of your husband. Michael has spoken of him." "Thank you," I said. "He would have loved to be here tonight." Mr. Hiroshi smiled as if I'd said exactly the right thing. He introduced his team, Miss Tanaka, the deputy director, probably in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and a composed stillness. Mr. Ito, the project architect, early 40s, who looked at Michael with the professional admiration of someone who'd studied his work, and a younger woman named Yuki, the contracts coordinator, who smiled warmly at everyone and seemed to be the room's emotional center. We sat. The food began arriving in the careful, unhurried way of places that understand that a meal is also a ceremony. Michael and Mr. Hiroshi moved into the substance of things quickly, drawings and timelines and environmental specifications. Miss Tanaka asked precise questions. Mr. Ito and Michael slipped into the language architects speak when they forget other people are in the room. I listened and ate and felt something I hadn't felt at a family event in years, which was comfortable. About 90 minutes in, after the main course had come and gone and the conversation had softened into the easier register of people who have mostly agreed and are now becoming acquainted, something shifted. Mr. Hiroshi and Miss Tanaka began speaking to each other in Japanese. Small things at first, comments about the food, a quiet joke that made Yuki smile. Mr. Ito joined in. It was natural, the way people relax into their first language when the formal part of an evening is over. Vanessa leaned forward. I should mention that I studied Japanese in college. She said it lightly, like she was offering a pleasant surprise. I minored in it at Wellesley. I'm a bit rusty, but I can follow along. Michael looked at her. You never told me that. It never came up. She waved it away as though it were nothing. Please, don't change anything on my account. I just didn't want you to feel like you had to speak English for our benefit. Mr. Hiroshi looked genuinely pleased. Mrs. Hayes, this is wonderful. Please, then we can be more relaxed. And just like that, a portion of the conversation opened into Japanese and closed around me. I set down my fork. I watched Vanessa translate selectively for Michael, choosing what he heard, shaping the edges of the conversation. Michael nodded along. He looked at me once. You doing okay, Mom? Perfectly fine. Vanessa poured herself more wine. The Japanese side of the table was visibly warmer now, more animated. Mr. Hiroshi said something, and Vanessa laughed and responded, and they spoke for a while in a way that excluded everyone else without being obviously rude about it, because Vanessa was very good at that. Then I heard it. My Japanese was not perfect. Keiko had been honest with me about that from the beginning. But 9 months of serious study will give you something better than perfection, which is comprehension. You stop translating in your head, and you begin to simply understand. Vanessa said to Miss Tanaka, in Japanese, that she hoped the evening wasn't too tedious with Michael's mother present, that older women tended to need a lot of managing. Miss Tanaka responded politely that Mrs. Hayes seemed quite pleasant. Vanessa said, still in Japanese, that I was pleasant enough, but honestly rather limited. I'd spent my whole career teaching art history at some small school no one had heard of, and I didn't really understand the world Michael moved in. She said it with the affectionate condescension of someone describing a well-meaning child. I kept my hands still in my lap. 32 years of standing in front of rooms full of people who were trying not to show what they were thinking had taught me a great deal about my own face. Miss Tanaka looked at me briefly and then away. Vanessa, encouraged by the lack of reaction, continued. She told them that I had been what she called a fixture, always around, always dropping by. She said she had been working on Michael for the past year about finding me a proper senior community, somewhere designed for people at my stage of life, somewhere I would have peers. She used a word for me that was technically neutral but carried the particular weight of dismissal, the way you'd refer to an object that has served its purpose. Mr. Ito looked at his plate. Yuki looked out the window. Vanessa said that the hard part was that I probably wouldn't be graceful about it, that women of my generation had a difficult time accepting when they were no longer needed. She said she was going to need Michael to present it as his idea, which wouldn't be difficult because Michael trusted her judgment on these things. She said she'd already looked at 3 places. One of them had a lovely arts and crafts program that she thought I'd enjoy. Miss Tanaka set down her chopsticks. Michael was looking at his phone, something about the Providence site plan. Miss Tanaka turned and looked directly at me. In Japanese, slowly and clearly, she said, Mrs. Hayes, do you understand what has been said? The room shifted. Vanessa's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. I had been waiting, without knowing I was waiting, for exactly this kind of moment, the kind that requires you to be exactly what you are. I looked at Miss Tanaka, and in Japanese, not perfectly, but clearly enough, I said that yes, I had understood. I said that I had been studying Japanese for 9 months, and that I had apparently chosen a useful night to practice. I apologized for not announcing it earlier. I said it had been a private project, and I hadn't realized until this evening that it would become relevant to anyone else's plans. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever sat inside. Vanessa made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Mr. Hiroshi looked at me with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Then he looked at Vanessa. Then he looked at Michael, who had lifted his head from his phone. "Mom," Michael said slowly, "did you just speak Japanese?" "A little," I said, in English. "How long?" "9 months. Sophie and I watch anime together. I thought it would be nice to understand it properly." I paused. I also wanted to prove to myself that I was still capable of learning something genuinely difficult. As it turns out, I was. Miss Tanaka spoke in English then, deliberately directed at Michael. She told him what Vanessa had said. Not everything, not with cruelty. Just the relevant facts. That his wife had described me as limited. That she had spoken of plans to move me into a senior community without my knowledge or consent. That she had said she expected Michael to agree once she framed it correctly, because he always did. Michael's face went through several things very quickly. He turned to Vanessa. Vanessa had set down her glass. She had the expression of someone calculating very fast and finding no good answers. Vanessa. His voice was quiet. That particular quiet I had heard in Richard's voice sometimes, the quiet that is far worse than volume. "Michael, you were just telling our clients, in a language you believed only you spoke, that you've been planning to move my mother into a nursing home. It's not a nursing home, it's a senior living." Without talking to me. "Because you never take these things seriously. You don't see what it takes to manage. My mother." His voice broke slightly on the word and then steadied. "She's my mother. You were going to arrange it and then present it to me." Vanessa looked around the table and saw no support anywhere. Mr. Ito was studying the grain of the wood tabletop. Yuki had her hands folded in her lap. Mr. Hiroshi's face was courteous and completely closed. "I was trying to manage our lives," Vanessa said. "Someone has to." "She is our family," Michael said. "She is not something to be managed." "Michael, I'd like you to wait for me outside, please." A long moment passed. Then Vanessa took her bag from the chair and stood and left the room without looking at me. The door closed behind her. Nobody spoke for a moment. Mr. Hiroshi reached for the teapot and refilled my cup. He did it himself, carefully, the way you do something when you want to signal that it matters. In Japanese, he said, "Mrs. Hayes, how long did you say you have been studying?" 9 months, I said, in Japanese. "I have a good teacher. Her name is Keiko Yamamoto. She teaches at the university in Millbrook." "Your accent is quite clean," Miss Tanaka said. She seemed to mean it. "I practice with a woman in Kyoto, Mrs. Fujiwara. She's been very patient with me." Mr. Hiroshi smiled then. A real one, the kind that reaches the eyes. He said that 9 months was remarkable. He said that in Japan there was a concept he thought about often, which was that a person who continues to learn never grows old. The body ages, but the mind that keeps reaching forward stays young where it counts. I felt my eyes sting and looked down at my tea until they stopped. Michael said, "Mr. Hiroshi, I owe you an apology. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration of what I hope will be a long professional relationship. Instead, Mr. Hiroshi stopped him with a small gesture. "Mr. Hayes, in my experience, a business relationship is only as reliable as the character of the people involved. Tonight I have learned a great deal about the character of everyone in this room." He paused. "All of it, in your case and your mother's case, has been reassuring." Michael looked at me. I looked at him. He was 38 years old, and he looked, in that moment, very much like the 12-year-old boy who used to bring me rocks he found interesting. He had Richard's eyes. He had always had Richard's eyes. "Mom," he said, "I didn't know about any of it." "I know, sweetheart." "How long has she been?" He stopped. "How long have things been difficult for you?" "A while." "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about all the things I had not wanted to be, the mother who causes problems, the woman who makes her son choose, the presence that becomes a burden. I thought about how much energy I had spent making myself smaller and more manageable, and how it hadn't protected me anyway. "I didn't want to be a problem," I said. I've spent a long time not wanting to be a problem. I think I may have taken it too far. Michael reached across the table and put his hand over mine. Mr. Hiroshi asked me, in Japanese, whether I had ever been to Japan. I told him no. I told him that Richard and I had planned to go for years and never made it. I told him about the guidebooks still on the shelf, about Kyoto in spring and cherry blossoms, and how I had stopped feeling resigned about the things we hadn't done and started feeling something more useful. "And what is that more useful thing?" he asked. "Determined," I said. "To go anyway. Alone if necessary, but to go." Miss Tanaka smiled. It was the first time her face had fully opened all evening. "My mother was widowed at 61, she said, in English this time, for Michael's benefit. She spent 8 years traveling after that. She went everywhere she and my father had meant to go. She said the trips were different without him. She said they were also beautiful in their own way." "I believe that," I said. Yuki, who had been quiet for a long time, spoke up. "I think it is very brave, what you have done. Learning a language at any age is hard. Learning it when you did not have to, just because you wanted to. Just because your granddaughter loves something and you wanted to meet her there, that is." She paused, looking for the word. "That is love as a practice, not just as a feeling." I had to look at my teacup again. Michael squeezed my hand and let it go. He straightened in his chair. He looked at Mr. Hiroshi with the clarity of someone who has just been relieved of something heavy. "I'd like to finish this conversation if you're willing, and I'd like my mother to stay." Mr. Hiroshi inclined his head. "We would have it no other way." The rest of the evening was longer and quieter and better. The contracts remained on the table, and the conversation moved around them. Business, and then personal, and then something that exists in between, the talk of people who are deciding whether to trust each other. Michael answered Mr. Hiroshi's questions without deflection. Mr. Ito and Michael talked about the Providence site in the specific, absorbed way of people who share a real passion. Miss Tanaka asked me about art history, what periods I had taught, what I thought the relationship was between traditional Japanese aesthetic principles and contemporary sustainable architecture. I had opinions. I always have opinions. Vanessa had told me that was a problem. It occurred to me now that it was actually among my better qualities. We signed the contracts at 9:15. Mr. Hiroshi signed first, then Michael, then Miss Tanaka as a witness, and then, in a gesture no one had planned, Mr. Hiroshi offered the pen to me. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "you are part of this family's character. It seems right." I signed my name in the margin. Not on the contract itself, but on the cover page. Eleanor M. Hayes. My handwriting, which has always been the handwriting of someone who spent decades writing on chalkboards, was very clear. Michael drove me home alone. He had called Vanessa from the parking lot, a brief conversation I didn't hear. When he got back in the car, his face was composed but tired in a deep way. We drove for a while without talking, which is something we've always been able to do, the comfortable silence of people who don't need to fill space. Finally, he said, "The assisted living place she mentioned. Had you heard anything about it before tonight?" "No. She'd toured it. She had a brochure." "I know." "Mom, I want you to know that I would never—" "Michael," I said it gently, "I believe you. I also want you to think honestly about how it would have gone if tonight hadn't happened, if she had brought you a brochure and a reason and a plan. I want you to think about what you would have done." A long silence. "I don't know," he said finally. It was honest. I respected it. "That's what I want you to sit with," I said, "not to punish you. Just because I think you need to know yourself well enough to answer that question." He nodded slowly. "I love you," I said. "I am also not a houseplant. I am a person with a past and a mind and a future, and I need you to see that, not just in a crisis, but on an ordinary Tuesday." He pulled into my driveway and put the car in park and sat there. "Dad used to say you were the most capable person he'd ever met," he said. He said it all the time. He said you were the one who actually understood how things worked. People, situations, all of it. He said he was just smart enough to marry you. "He was very smart," I said. "I forgot. I don't know how, but I forgot." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I got busy and I stopped paying attention and I forgot who you are." "Then remember," I said. "That's all I'm asking. Remember." I got out of the car and walked up to my front door. I heard him wait in the driveway until the porch light was on and I was inside. That's something Richard had always done too. I stood in my front hallway for a moment in the quiet of a house that has known a lot of living, and I felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness exactly. Something sturdier than that. The feeling of having been fully seen after a long time of being looked through. The weeks that followed were hard for Michael in ways I won't detail here because they're his story, not mine. I'll say only that there were conversations and decisions and that he handled them with more honesty than I had expected and more pain than I wanted to watch. Sophie stayed with me for 2 weeks in November, and we watched anime on the couch under the quilt, and I explained things to her that she was old enough to understand gently, and she sat very still and then said, "Grandma, I don't think Mama ever really knew you." And I said, "I don't think she tried to." And Sophie thought about that for a while and then said, "I know you." And I said, "I know, love. That's the most important thing." Mr. Hiroshi called me directly 3 weeks later. I was in my kitchen grading, an old habit. A friend had asked me to look over some student essays for a class she was teaching at the community college. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I have a proposal. My company runs a small cultural exchange initiative connecting American professionals and educators with Japanese institutions. We are looking for someone to join a 2-week program in Kyoto this spring. Seminars, cultural immersion, conversations with students at a local university. We thought of you." I set down my pen. "We would also," he said, "be very glad if your granddaughter might join the youth component of the program. We have 10 days designed for young people Sophie's age. Japan's relationship with young American students who love Japanese culture is one we are trying to actively cultivate." I was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Hiroshi," I said. "Why me?" "Because you are curious," he said. "Because you are humble enough to be a student at 66. Because you spent 9 months learning something difficult for love. And because, frankly, Mrs. Hayes, after the dinner we shared, I would trust your character with a great deal." Sophie lost her mind. There is no other way to describe it. She called me 3 times the evening I told her, once to make sure it was real, once to ask what she should pack, and once just to say, with 9-year-old sincerity, "Grandma, this is literally the best thing that has ever happened to anyone." We flew out of Boston on a Tuesday in April. Michael drove us to the airport. He parked and walked us all the way to the security line, which he didn't have to do. He hugged Sophie for a long time, and then he hugged me. "Dad would have wanted to come," he said into my shoulder. "I know," I said. "I'm going for both of us." He pulled back and looked at me and nodded, and I could see Richard in his face, not in sadness but in the thing Richard always had, which was the ability to recognize what was true and stop fighting it. Sophie grabbed my hand as we walked through security. She was wearing a sweatshirt from a show we'd been watching together, and she had a phrasebook in her bag she'd read cover to cover 3 times. She looked up at me as we joined the line and said, in Japanese, still a little clumsy, still a little small, "Grandma, say something in Japanese." And I did. Fluently and without apology, I said that we were on our way somewhere we had always been meant to go, and that we were going together, and that I was not even a little bit finished with the world. She squeezed my hand very hard. If you're hearing this, and you have started to believe that you are past the point of being surprising, to others or to yourself, I want to tell you something I know now that I didn't know 2 years ago. Invisibility is not something that happens to you. It is something you can refuse. Not with noise, not with drama, but with the quiet and continuous decision to keep growing, to keep reaching toward things that matter, to refuse to let anyone else's limitations become the boundary of your life. You are not a footnote in someone else's story. You are not a phase that has concluded. You are not what someone else decides to do with you. Pick up the language you always meant to learn. Take the class. Call the friend. Book the flight. Take up the exact amount of space your life entitles you to, which is considerable, and do not apologize for a single inch of it. Because the moment you stop waiting for permission to be fully yourself is the moment everything changes. I know. I was there. I watched it happen from a seat at a restaurant table in a city I had lived in for 66 years, with my hands folded in my lap and a secret I'd kept for 9 months, and a language no one knew I spoke. I am not done yet. Not even close. and neither are you.